Documentaries have proven countless times that if they are done correctly and tell a compelling enough story, they can change people's perspective on anything. Sometimes these documentaries will expose a dark truth about a certain topic, so that's what we're going to be having a look at today. So here are 5 terrifying documentaries that will change your perspective. Number 1. Rats. Rats is a 2016 documentary that centers around rat infestations in various different cities, including New York, Mumbai, and parts of England. It goes in depth discussing the various different ways that rats can carry and transmit diseases and what effect this has around the world. It also shows us how different cultures react to these rodents and how they handle the seemingly endless amount of rats that plague these areas. Some cultures are seen cooking and eating them, while others are seen praising and worshipping them. The documentary also shows us how intelligent rats are and how they're able to adapt to certain situations, making them difficult to kill. They show experiments and tests that show the viewers the anatomy of a rat and the other creatures that live inside it. They interview scientists, doctors, exterminators, and more in order to give the most thorough analysis possible. The documentary is both creepy and eye-opening, and it's definitely worth a watch.
Rats are basically down in the sewers. They can swim up. A rat, when he bites you, he twists. They're just too damn smart. It's becoming harder and harder to kill them. End of winter, it's rat reproduction season. You put the rodenticide inside the bait box. Our elected officials do things half-assed.
Number 2. Kids for Cash. Kids for Cash was released in 2013 and details a scandal that occurred in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, where 2 judges took bribes from a private prison in order to sentence more young children to their facility. The judges, Michael Conahan and Mark Chivarala, often gave harsh punishments for petty crimes. Some of these examples include a 12-year-old boy who was sentenced to 7 years in a juvenile prison for cursing at another girl's mom. Another example was a 14-year-old girl who got in a fight at school and was detained for 4.5 years because of this. These are just 2 examples of how corrupt and harsh these judges were, but hundreds of kids faced the same fate. Things like underage drinking, trespassing in empty buildings, and getting into fights could get a young child incarcerated for years. These punishments would essentially ruin the child's life and make it difficult for them to get into college or get a good job, but the private prison that they were detained in would benefit from grants and essentially profit off of the prisoners. The documentary talks about the case in detail and interviews the children, the families, and the prosecutors of the case. And in a surprise twist, both judges also give interviews and tell their side of the story. Originally, the 2 judges took a plea deal and were sentenced to 7 years in jail, but that was overruled after Chivarala denied his involvement in the scheme. He was later sentenced to 28 years in federal prison, and Michael Conahan was sentenced to 17.5 years in prison. The documentary is well worth a watch if you want a detailed report of one of the biggest legal scandals in the US this century.
Former Luzerne County judge faces charges tonight in a scandal known as Kids for Cash.
$2.6 million
In return for sentencing kids to juvenile detention.
I'd never send a kid away for a penny. I'm not this mad judge who was just putting them in shackles, throwing kids away.
He went there as a free-spirited kid. He came out a hardened man, I would say.
Here I was saying we can trust that judge to be fair, and that's not what happened.
I was scared every day.
I was only 14. All those years I missed.
This is not a cash for kids case.
This is not bad! You ruined my life! I still wake up from nightmares.
Number 3. The Cannibal Warlords of Liberia. In 2012, Vice News released a 53-minute documentary known as the Cannibal Warlords of Liberia. While the project does cover cannibalism, it's more of a deep dive into the politics, poverty, and the overall state of Liberia. The team meet up with generals, journalists, and talk to various different people about the conditions of Liberia and what the government is doing about it. In the piece, we see kids taking heroin, slums filled with mostly trash, illegal sex working, and more. That really only touches the surface of how corrupt and poorly run the country is. The documentary also shines a light on 2 devastating civil wars, one of which ran for 8 years, from 1989 to 1997, and the second one occurred 2 years later and lasted 4 years, from 1999 to 2003. These wars resulted in the deaths of an estimated 500,000 people. The country was essentially a post-apocalyptic war zone after this, and the citizens have been trying to adjust ever since. The insights this documentary provides is both fascinating and heartbreaking, and will give you a general idea of the current state of one of the most dangerous countries on Earth. Number 4. The Confession Tapes. The Confession Tapes is a Netflix original series that was released in 2017 that focuses on 6 different controversial cases where all of the criminals involved gave confessions to different murders but later stated that they were coerced into doing so. The documentary shows interviews, interrogations, and more, and lets the viewer decide whether or not these people were pressured into a confession or if they actually committed the crime. In most of these cases, it does seem that the interrogators want any kind of a confession more than they want the actual truth. It is a disturbing deep dive into a bizarre trend and shows the serious flaws in the justice system in the United States and Canada. It also shows us various different tactics that prosecutors will use in order to get a confession, including shady deals, straight up lying, and in the first episode, we see a system known in Canada as the Mr. Big technique. This technique involves an undercover police officer befriending a suspect and bringing them into some kind of an operation that is essentially made up. They then attempt to get a confession out of the suspect by offering them something in return. This technique has been controversial, and many experts state that it is not an effective way to get a legitimate confession off of a suspect. These cases are merely examples, and there are probably thousands of people in prison right now, serving time for crimes they did not commit. This documentary thoroughly goes through the flawed justice system that many countries still possess.
You're gonna confess to setting this woman on fire, and you didn't do it? No way.
I want to apologize to the family for what I've done.
He confessed, he's going to prison. Isn't that the way it works in America?
Justice has been served. We're going to have her spend the rest of her life in prison.
All of us could falsely confess to something.
If you gotta keep your eyes closed while you say it, say it.
It might take you a week.
Let's go right now.
It might take me an hour.
Say it.
But we're all gonna have our breaking point.
Number 5. The Imposter. The Imposter is a documentary released in 2012 that tells a confusing, fascinating, and creepy story. In the summer of 1994, a Texas boy named Nicholas Barclay, aged 13, disappeared while walking home from a game of basketball. 3 years later, in 1997, another boy was found in Spain who claimed to be Nicholas Barclay. The family took him in and stated that he was in fact Nicholas, but he wasn't. The boy who had returned to Texas was not a 16-year-old Nicholas Barclay, but instead was a 23-year-old man named Frederick Bourdon, who was a serial imposter who was pretending to be Nicholas. He dyed his hair blonde and gave himself the same tattoos as Nicholas, but apart from that, there were very little similarities. Frederick had a French accent, brown eyes, different ears, and a different nose, and yet the family took him in regardless. The movie is recorded over a decade after this occurred, and it features interviews from Frederick, Nicholas's family, and the law officials who worked on the case. They also speak to the private investigator who discovered that they were 2 different people. Although you may think that this description gives away the whole story, the documentary has many twists and turns, and presents a disturbing theory near the end of the movie.
Hello. We found a kid here. He's about 14, 15 years old.
The thought of what somebody could have done to him, it gives you nightmares.
He doesn't have no IDs, no documents on it. It's very scary.
From as long as I remember, I wanted to be someone else.
We had no idea what kind of person we were getting. He had changed so much.
There was just something wrong about it.
mean, who wouldn't see it?
And that is all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, you can hit that like button. If you want to check out any of these documentaries, I will link the ones down below that I can in the description. I know for a fact that 3 of them are on YouTube now, so you can go check them out if you want to. If you enjoyed this video and you are not subscribed, I make similar videos to this all the time, so please consider doing so. But like I said, that's all for now, and as always, until next time.